6 months ago, Matt read chapters 6 through 10 from the Dhammapada for us. Since then, many of you have asked for a deeper exploration of their meaning. That's exactly what we'll do today. I'm Peter from Buddha's Wisdom, and we're diving into some of the most psychologically sophisticated wisdom ever recorded. What fascinated me about revisiting Matt's reading was how these 2,500-year-old verses sound like they were written specifically for 2025. We're living through times when it's harder than ever to distinguish real wisdom from clever marketing, genuine freedom from the illusion of choice, and meaningful progress from busy work. The Buddha understood something about human nature that behavioral science is just catching up to. These chapters don't just describe enlightened states. They're practical guides for anyone trying to build something meaningful while staying sane. Remember, in our first deep dive, we explored how mind precedes all things? Well, these 5 chapters show us what happens when you actually master that principle. From recognizing true wisdom to understanding why small choices compound into life-changing consequences. So let's explore Chapter 6, which starts with what might be the best leadership advice you'll ever hear. Should one find a wise critic to point out faults and give valuable advice, let one follow such a sage as one would a guide to hidden treasure. This opening verse hits different when you realize most people spend their lives avoiding exactly this kind of person. We live in an age of echo chambers and confirmation bias, where algorithms feed us content we already agree with. But the Buddha understood something crucial about growth. You need someone who cares enough about your success to risk making you uncomfortable. Notice he doesn't say, find someone who's always positive, or surround yourself with cheerleaders. He says, find someone who will point out your faults. Warren Buffett calls this his inner circle, people who will tell him when he's about to make a terrible decision. Jeff Bezos built this principle into Amazon's culture with what they call disagree and commit. The most successful people actively seek out what researchers call constructive criticism. But here's what most people miss. The verse says, such a sage as one would a guide to hidden treasure. Your blind spots aren't just obstacles to avoid. They're actually where your greatest potential lies hidden. Irrigators guide the water, fletchers shape the arrow, carpenters bend the wood, the wise control themselves. I love this verse because it destroys the myth of natural talent. Everything valuable requires skilled shaping. You don't just stumble into wisdom any more than you stumble into a perfectly crafted arrow. The irrigation metaphor is particularly relevant today. We're drowning in information, but starving for wisdom. Wise people don't consume everything. They direct their mental energy like farmers directing water to where it's needed most, but the real game changer comes next. Like a deep lake, clear and unruffled, the wise become tranquil after hearing the Dhamma. Most people become more agitated the more information they consume. Check your own experience. How do you feel after scrolling social media for an hour? Probably not like a deep lake, clear and unruffled. Wise people develop what I call mental filtration. They can receive information without being disturbed by it. They've learned to separate signal from noise. The practical application. Try this experiment for 1 week before consuming any content, news, social media, even educational material. Ask yourself, will this make me more like a clear lake or more like churning water? You'll be surprised how much of what we think is staying informed is actually just mental pollution. The chapter ends with this reality check. Few among men are those who cross to the further shore. The rest, the bulk of men, only run up and down the hither bank. Most people stay busy chasing the same problems again and again, mistaking motion for progress. They run up and down the same patterns, the same limited thinking. True wisdom isn't about moving faster. It's about actually crossing over to new understanding. Which brings us to Chapter 7, where the Buddha shows us what total freedom actually looks like. At first glance, Arahat sounds like a lofty Buddhist title, but if you've ever had even a fleeting moment of complete peace, no craving, no worry, no inner conflict, you've glimpsed what this means. The Arahat, Pali for one who is worthy, has extinguished what Buddhism calls the three roots of suffering: greed, lobha, hatred, dosa, and delusion, moha. There is no more suffering for one who has completed the journey, who is free from sorrow, who has freed oneself on all sides, who has thrown off all shackles. Before you think this is just religious idealism, consider what these shackles actually are. You know, that constant background anxiety about what others think of you? Gone. That endless cycle of wanting the next thing, the next achievement, the next experience? Broken. The exhausting need to defend your image and be right all the time? Released. But here's what's fascinating. The Buddha doesn't describe this person as passive or withdrawn. The mindful exert themselves. They are not attached to any home. Like swans that abandon the lake, they leave home after home behind. This is describing someone who's fully engaged but not trapped. Like swans that can land on any lake but aren't confined to one. They can engage completely with life without being imprisoned by circumstances. I remember working with a business leader who embodied this principle. She was deeply committed to her company's success, but not emotionally trapped by it. When market conditions required a complete pivot, she could adapt without the psychological resistance that paralyzes most people. Engaged, but not attached. Even the gods hold dear the wise one whose senses are subdued like horses well trained by a charioteer. Your senses, what you see, hear, feels, are like powerful horses. Untrained, they pull you in every direction. Trained, they become your allies. This becomes crucial in our age of design to be addictive content. Every app, every platform is engineered to capture and hold your attention. The Arahat represents someone who has trained their senses to serve wisdom rather than impulse. The chapter ends beautifully. Delightful are the forests where worldlings find no pleasure. There the passionless will rejoice, for they seek no sensual pleasures. This isn't about becoming a monk. It's about finding satisfaction that doesn't depend on constant external stimulation. The Arahat has discovered what researchers call intrinsic joy, happiness that comes from within rather than from getting things. Understanding this level of freedom naturally makes us ask, what really matters? Chapter 8 uses a brilliant teaching method to answer that question. The Buddha was brilliant at using numbers to make a point. Throughout Chapter 8, he keeps using 1,000 as his measuring stick. But he's not really talking about math. He's talking about what actually moves the needle in your life. Better than 1,000 useless words is one useful word, hearing which one attains peace. We're living in the age of content overload. Podcasts, YouTube videos, articles, posts, stories, reels. But how much of it actually changes anything? Most of us consume thousands of hours of content that make zero lasting impact. Think about it. Can you recall even one sentence that truly changed how you see the world? Meanwhile, the rest fades like background noise. That's exactly what the Buddha points to. Then he drops what might be the most important verse in the entire Dhammapada. Though one may conquer 1,000 times 1,000 men in battle, yet he, indeed, is the noblest victor who conquers himself. External victories feel sweet in the moment, but how quickly they evaporate. Reputation lost overnight, wealth wiped out in a market crash, status destroyed by one scandal. But internal mastery, no one can take that from you. But the Buddha gets even more specific. Month after month for 1,000 years one may make offerings with 1,000 coins. Yet if only for a moment, one pays homage to a person perfected in meditation, That homage is better than a century of sacrifice. Translation: 5 minutes of genuine learning from someone who has mastered themselves beats years of empty rituals or surface-level networking. This principle applies everywhere. One honest conversation with a mentor who challenges you beats hundreds of hours of random networking events. One book that genuinely shifts your perspective beats dozens that just confirm what you already believe. One moment of true self-awareness beats years of self-help consumption without application. The chapter builds to this crescendo. Better than living 100 years not seeing the supreme truth is living one day seeing the supreme truth. The supreme truth isn't some mystical concept. It's seeing reality clearly instead of through the filters of your conditioning, fears, and wishful thinking. Most people go their entire lives without one day of clear seeing. They see through the lens of their past, their ego, their fears about the future. But one day of genuine clarity, understanding how your mind actually works, how your emotions actually function, is worth more than decades of living on autopilot. Here is a practical test. At the end of each day this week, ask yourself, did I encounter any truth today that actually changed how I see things? If the answer is consistently no, you might be consuming thousands of words without finding the one that leads to peace. Which brings us to Chapter 9, where the Buddha examines how we drift away from truth through small compromises. Chapter 9 doesn't moralize about evil. The Buddha analyzes it like a scientist studying a natural phenomenon. As Matt guided us through these verses, make haste in doing good, restrain your mind from evil. He who is slow in doing good, his mind delights in evil. Notice the psychology here. Modern neuroscience now describes what the Buddha already knew intuitively: the formation of neuroplastic habit loops that drive our behaviors. There's no neutral zone. Your mind is always moving toward either wholesome or unwholesome patterns. When you're not actively cultivating good, you're passively drifting toward its opposite. This isn't about religious morality. It's about understanding how habits and neural pathways actually work. Every choice you make is training your brain to make similar choices in the future. Every time you choose the easier path over the right path, you're making the right path harder to choose next time. But then the Buddha gives us one of the most important insights about consequences. Think not lightly of evil, saying, "It will not come to me." Drop by drop is the water pot filled. Likewise the fool, gathering it little by little, fills himself with evil. No one sets out to become a liar, but one small distortion, one avoided truth, one rationalized shortcut, and years later, you barely recognize who you've become. This drop-by-drop principle explains how people end up in destructive patterns without ever making a conscious decision to go there. Decision scientists call this moral drift, the gradual erosion of ethical standards through small concessions. But the Buddha understood it perfectly. Destructive patterns accumulate gradually through choices that seem harmless at the time. The good news, the same principle works in reverse. Think not lightly of good, saying, "It will not come to me." Drop by drop is the water pot filled. Likewise, the wise man, gathering it little by little, fills himself with good. This is why small daily practices matter so much. Reading one page of wisdom, taking one mindful breath, making one kind gesture. These seem insignificant, but they're filling your internal water pot drop by drop. I learned this lesson personally when I delayed giving honest feedback to someone I cared about, thinking I was being kind. Months later, I realized I had let them walk blind into failure. Not because I didn't care, but because I lacked the courage to make them uncomfortable when it mattered. The chapter ends with a sobering truth. Neither in the sky nor in mid-ocean, nor by entering into mountain clefts, nowhere in the world, is there a place where one may escape from the results of evil deeds. This isn't about divine punishment, it's about the natural law of consequences. Your actions shape your character shapes your choices, and your choices shape your life. There's no geographic location where you can escape from who you've become through your actions. Understanding how destructive patterns develop naturally leads us to understand how we can avoid creating suffering for ourselves and others. Chapter 10 completes this teaching. The final chapter Matt guided us through contains what might be the most practical wisdom for living in a complex world. The Buddha begins with a simple but profound observation. All tremble at punishment, all fear death, drawing the parallel to yourself, neither kill nor get others to kill. This isn't just about physical violence. The Buddha is pointing out something fundamental about human psychology. Everyone wants to be safe and happy. Everyone fears pain and death. This universal truth becomes the foundation for ethical behavior. The most effective negotiators and leaders understand that everyone, even their opponents, shares these basic human needs. When you truly internalize this, it becomes much harder to dehumanize others. Think about your own relationships, that person who frustrated you today. They want happiness and safety, just like you do. That difficult colleague, same basic human needs. This recognition doesn't excuse bad behavior, but it changes how you respond to it. But the chapter goes deeper. Whoever seeking his own happiness hurts with the rod others who also desire happiness will not find happiness after death. The Buddha isn't talking about afterlife punishment here. He's describing a natural law. When you pursue your happiness at the expense of others who also want happiness, you create conditions that ultimately undermine your own well-being. In business, leaders who advance themselves by destroying their team's morale might succeed short-term, but they create environments that eventually become toxic, even for themselves. In families, parents who control through fear might get compliance, but they erode the trust that makes genuine connection possible. The chapter gives us a beautiful alternative. If, like a broken gong, you silence yourself, you have approached nibbana, for vindictiveness is no longer in you. Imagine a gong struck hard, yet silent. That's the power of a mind that has broken free from automatic reactivity. A gong that's been broken doesn't ring when struck. Similarly, a person who has transcended vindictiveness doesn't automatically strike back when hit by criticism, insults, or attacks. They've broken the cycle of automatic reaction. This doesn't mean becoming passive. It means developing the freedom to choose your response rather than being controlled by your impulses. The chapter builds to this powerful recognition. Only rarely is there a man in this world who, restrained by modesty, avoids reproach, as a thoroughbred horse avoids the whip. The thoroughbred horse is so sensitive and well-trained that it responds to the slightest touch. It doesn't need harsh correction because it's developed inner sensitivity to what's right. Similarly, a person who has developed inner wisdom doesn't need external rules and punishments to behave ethically. They've developed internal guidance. This is the ultimate goal of wisdom development. Not blind obedience to external rules, but the cultivation of inner awareness that naturally guides you toward beneficial actions. Six months ago, when Matt first recited these verses, I wasn't sure everyone would appreciate how practical they are. But looking at your comments and messages, it's clear these teachings hit something deep. What strikes me most about chapters 6 through 10 is how they build a complete system for human development. Chapter 6 shows us how to recognize and cultivate wisdom through choosing the right people and training our minds skillfully. Chapter 7 reveals what complete freedom looks like, not withdrawal from life, but engagement without attachment. Chapter 8 teaches us to focus on what actually matters instead of getting lost in impressive but meaningless activity. Chapter 9 helps us understand how destructive patterns develop gradually and how to break them before they break us. Chapter 10 grounds everything in our shared humanity. We all want happiness and safety, and that recognition becomes the foundation for wise action. Remember from our first deep dive how mind precedes all things? Today, we've seen what happens when you master your mind. You stop being a prisoner of your own patterns. You cross to the further shore. This week, try to apply Chapter 6's wisdom. Identify one person in your life who cares enough about your growth to give you honest feedback. Then actually ask for it. Not about what you're doing wrong, but about what you're not seeing clearly. The Dhammapada isn't meant to be read once and understood. These are principles to return to test in your actual life, to let mature over time. Matt will be back soon with more pure readings, and I'll continue unpacking how this ancient wisdom applies to our modern challenges. Because the more things change, the more these fundamental truths about human nature remain constant. Drop a comment below. Which of these chapters feels most alive for you right now? Which one is your current battlefield? Your reflections might just give someone else the insight they needed today. This is Peter from Buddha's Wisdom. Thanks for taking this journey through some of the most psychologically sophisticated teachings ever recorded. Stay curious, stay wise,